The clink of crystal rang out like a warning bell. At exactly 9:30, Vanessa Cole lifted her wine glass high, demanding everyone's attention with the confidence of a woman who had never once been told no. She smiled that sharp, polished smile of hers, the one that always carried a hint of cruelty beneath the gloss. "Everyone," she announced sweetly, her voice dripping with honey that didn't quite hide the venom, "I'd like to make a toast to my dear mother-in-law, Eleanor Hayes, who has just shared the wonderful news that she's unemployed again. Isn't that something? How does it feel to be such a complete loser at your age?" Her perfectly manicured fingers made exaggerated air quotes around the word unemployed. The room went still. Daniel's colleagues and their wives looked down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their mashed potatoes and salmon fillets. No one dared to look up, because everyone knew Vanessa had crossed a line. I set my wineglass down with deliberate care, my hand steady as if I were in the middle of surgery. I could feel the heat of humiliation creeping at the edges of the room, but I wouldn't let her see me sweat. "Not tonight." "Well, Vanessa," I said evenly, my voice calm as the first sip of morning coffee, "I imagine it feels about the same as learning you're about to be evicted from the house you've been living in for the past 3 years." The words hit harder than any shout could have. For a moment, Vanessa's smug expression froze, then melted into disbelief. Around the table, forks clattered against plates as several guests glanced up in shock. "You have 30 days to find your own place," I continued, never breaking eye contact with her. "Because from tonight, consider it your official 30-day notice. And remember, this house has always been yours to you and Daniel. It never did." "What are you talking about?" Vanessa demanded, her voice suddenly higher, thinner. "I'm talking about the deed," I said, leaning back in my chair, savoring the silence that followed. "This house, the one you've redecorated as if it were your personal stage, the one you parade around on your little social media posts, belongs to me. I bought it outright. Your names were never on the paperwork." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Daniel's fork slipped from his hand and hit the table with a metallic thud. "Mom, what?" His voice was small, almost childlike, the same tone he used to have when he came home with a bad grade in middle school. "Oh, sweetheart." I let my smile soften, though it was still sharp around the edges. "Didn't your wife tell you?" "When the bank wouldn't approve your mortgage because of your student loans," I stepped in. "I used your father's life insurance policy to buy this house with cash. I didn't co-sign, I didn't lend. I bought it. Your names have never been on the deed. Not once." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood up, smoothing down the navy dress I'd chosen deliberately for the evening. Solid, timeless, the kind of dress that made a statement without shouting. "Vanessa," I said, fixing her with a steady gaze, "you've been particularly cruel tonight. Let me make this crystal clear. You and Daniel have 30 days to move out. I suggest you start looking at places that fit your part-time yoga instructor budget. Before we dive into family betrayal storyal, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are." Her face drained of color. Around the table, Daniel's colleagues shifted uncomfortably, but I noticed the flicker of satisfaction in their eyes. Nobody liked Vanessa. She had a gift for alienating people, even the ones who tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. "You can't do this," she stammered. "You can't just throw us out." "Actually, I can." My voice was steady, unshakable. "It's called being a landlord. You might want to look it up." "Oh." I gathered my shawl and purse, ignoring the stunned silence that had fallen over the room. "Thank you all for dinner," I said politely, glancing at the guests who didn't know whether to laugh or hide under the table. "Daniel, we'll talk tomorrow. Vanessa." I let the pause hang in the air, just long enough for her to squirm. "You might want to start scrolling the apartment listings tonight. The rental market is brutal this time of year." And with that, I walked out of the dining room of the house I owned, head high, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp with the smell of autumn leaves. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. For 2 years since my husband passed, I had endured Vanessa's barbs, her smug little digs, her constant efforts to chip away at my dignity. Tonight she thought she had finally broken me. But the truth was, I had been waiting for the right moment to remind her whose name was on the deed and whose life she was trying to control. As I walked down the path to my car, I could almost hear the buzz of whispered conversation erupting behind me. Tomorrow morning would bring phone calls, no doubt. Daniel's confusion, Vanessa's fury, the colleagues' gossip. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it only needs to be precise, delivered at the exact right moment, in front of the exact right audience, and Vanessa had handed me that moment on a silver platter. The phone rang at 7:15 a.m., right on schedule. I had been up since dawn, sitting in my sunroom with a steaming cup of coffee and the local paper spread across my lap. The light filtering through the windows was soft and golden, but I knew the voice waiting for me on the other end of the line would be anything but gentle. "Mom, what the hell happened last night?" Daniel's tone was strained, exhausted. I could picture him pacing the kitchen, my kitchen, in the Maple Street house I own, running his hands through his hair the way he had since he was a boy in trouble. "Language, Daniel," I said calmly, setting down my mug. "And I think you know exactly what happened. Your wife tried to humiliate me in front of your colleagues, so I reminded her where she actually stands. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me." "You can't kick us out of our home," he shot back. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was, that word. Home. "It's not your home, sweetheart," I said gently but firmly. "It never was." There was silence on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of a chair scraping against the tile, as if he'd collapsed into a seat. "Do you remember 3 years ago?" I continued, my voice steady. "When you and Vanessa were so excited about buying your first house? You had your heart set on that little Tudor on Maple Street, but the bank wouldn't approve your mortgage. Too much student loan debt, not enough income history." "Yeah," Daniel said, his voice quieter now. "And do you remember how I offered to help? How I said I'd figure something out so you could still have a fresh start?" Another pause. "I thought you co-signed for us." I let out a soft sigh. "No, Daniel. I didn't co-sign. I bought the house outright, $420,000 cash from your father's life insurance policy. I put it in my name alone. Every month for the past 3 years, the checks you've been writing weren't mortgage payments. They were rent, paid to me." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he whispered, "Why didn't you tell us?" I closed the paper and folded my hands in my lap. "Because, Daniel, your father and I always believed in helping you kids without making you feel helpless. I wanted you to feel like you were standing on your own 2 feet, to have pride in your accomplishments. But pride and dignity aren't things that can be handed out like candy. They have to be earned. And, unfortunately, Vanessa has confused entitlement with achievement. On the other end of the line, I heard a muffled curse. Then, softer, "She says you're being vindictive." "She says a lot of things," I replied, allowing just the faintest trace of sarcasm to edge my voice. "Most of them are worth about as much as her yoga certifications. She's my wife, Mom, and I'm your mother." I let the words hang there. "But this isn't about choosing sides. This is about respect, about basic human decency, about the fact that your wife thought it was acceptable to call your 64-year-old mother a loser in front of a room full of strangers." I heard his breath hitch, like a boy trying not to cry. For all his faults, Daniel was not cruel. He was simply weak, and weakness could be forgiven. Cruelty could not. "What do you want us to do?" he asked finally, his voice small. "I want you to find your own place," I said plainly. "Get qualified for your own mortgage. Build your own life without leaning on me as a safety net you abuse. You've got 30 days. If you and Vanessa can't find a place in that time, then you'll figure it out. You're 35 years old, Daniel. It's time." There was a long pause. Then the line went quiet. I could picture him sitting there, staring at the kitchen wall, realizing for the first time just how much of his so-called independence had been an illusion. "I love you, Mom," he said finally, his voice breaking a little. "I love you too, sweetheart, always. But love doesn't mean letting someone walk all over me in my own house. And it doesn't mean letting your wife turn me into her personal punching bag." If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The call ended with a heavy silence. I set my phone down on the table, lifted my coffee cup, and took a slow sip. I knew what was coming. There would be begging, bargaining, promises to change. Vanessa would try every trick in her book to manipulate the situation. She would play victim. She would play peacemaker. She might even try to play sweet daughter-in-law again. But I had drawn my line in the sand. For too long, I had let grief and loneliness soften my edges, allowed Vanessa's constant snipes to roll off my back. But last night reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. I was still Eleanor Hayes, IRS investigator for 32 years, a widow who had survived burying the love of her life, a woman who knew the difference between numbers on a page and the truth hidden beneath them. Vanessa thought she was playing a game of chess. What she didn't realize was that I'd been playing this game longer than she'd been alive, and unlike her, I knew exactly how to win. The knock on my front door came at 2 o'clock sharp the next afternoon. I'd been expecting it. Some people send flowers or call with a shaky voice when they've gone too far. Vanessa Cole shows up at your door like she owns the place, wearing head-to-toe designer athleisure and carrying a grocery store bouquet. I opened the door and raised an eyebrow. "Vanessa," I said evenly. "Dorothy, sorry, Eleanor." She corrected herself quickly, pasting on a smile. "We need to talk." Before I could respond, she brushed past me into the foyer, her perfume too sweet, her sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floor. She set the bouquet on the entry table like a peace offering, then folded her arms, looking as if she were about to negotiate a business merger. "I want to apologize for last night," she began, her tone carefully measured. "I was out of line. I've just been under a lot of stress with the yoga studio and the holidays and—" "Yes," I cut in, "you were out of line." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut again. She hadn't expected me to agree so quickly. I crossed my arms and tilted my head. "Let me ask you something, Vanessa. Your yoga studio, the one you've been launching for the past 2 years, how many paying clients have you had?" Her flawless composure cracked just a little. "It takes time to build a client base." I'm sure it does. Humor me. How much money have you and Daniel sunk into this little venture?" She shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flicking toward the bouquet like it might save her. "I don't see how that's relevant." "Humor me," I repeated. She exhaled sharply. "Maybe 15,000? Equipment, marketing, insurance?" I nodded slowly, as if I were considering her answer. "So let me get this straight. You've spent $15,000 on a business that hasn't generated a single documented client. And you've been living in a $500,000 home that I own, paying rent to me, while telling everyone you're an entrepreneur." Her eyes flashed with irritation. "I'm working on it." "Oh, I'm sure you are," I said dryly. "But here's the thing, Vanessa. I didn't just pull numbers out of a hat for 32 years. I was a certified financial investigator for the IRS. Fraudulent business expenses, unreported income, that was my bread and butter. So when you tell me you have no paying clients, but your social media is full of photos of you leading private sessions in mansions all over the county, you'll forgive me if I don't believe you." The color drained from her face. "Those are just friends. They were helping me practice." "Friends who hand you cash in envelopes?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Friends who tag you on Instagram and write about their amazing private sessions with their new favorite instructor? Friends who pay $75 an hour, 6 to 8 times a week? That kind of friend?" Vanessa's hands trembled as she tucked her hair behind her ear. You can't prove anything." I smiled pleasantly, the way a cat might smile at a trapped mouse. "Can't I? Your car has GPS. So does your phone. Not to mention your clients' posts online, which tag you by name. All it would take is a few hours of documentation, and I could build a case solid enough to make an IRS auditor salivate." She sank into one of my kitchen chairs, the swagger she'd carried into my house evaporating. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to understand something," I said, leaning against the counter. "I am not some fragile widow you can bully. I am not your meal ticket, and I am most certainly not your doormat." Her eyes filled with tears she was probably hoping would soften me. They didn't. If you ever speak to me the way you did last night again, I continued, my tone sharpening, I won't just evict you. I'll report your little under-the-table business to the IRS, complete with evidence. And trust me, they will take an interest in a yoga instructor who's pulling in $24,000 a year off the books while claiming her studio is a failure. You wouldn't, she breathed. Try me, R. At that moment, the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside, his shoulders slumped, his face gray with exhaustion. He looked from me to his wife, taking in the tension hanging thick in the air. What's going on? He asked. Your wife and I were just discussing her business, I said evenly. Vanessa shot to her feet. She's threatening to report me to the IRS over a few yoga lessons. I turned to Daniel, my expression calm. Not a few lessons, son. $75 an hour, 6 to 8 sessions a week for almost a year. That's close to $24,000 in unreported income. That's tax evasion. Daniel blinked, stunned. 75 an hour? His voice cracked. You told me the studio was failing. You said you were barely scraping by. Vanessa's silence was answer enough. For the next hour, I laid out the facts for my son, her hidden income, the separate bank accounts she insisted on maintaining, the cash she'd been pocketing while he covered the bills on a teacher's salary. His face grew paler with every detail, the weight of betrayal settling heavily on his shoulders. Finally, he whispered, I feel like an idiot. I reached across the table and took his hand. You're not an idiot, Daniel. You're trusting. There's a difference. But this isn't about money anymore. It's about honesty. And your wife has been lying to you for a very long time. He nodded slowly, his eyes dark with hurt. And for the first time, I saw the cracks in Vanessa's perfect armor widen as she realized her carefully spun web was starting to unravel. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day when you least expect the ground to shift beneath your feet. I was sitting with my neighbor, Clara Simmons, sipping coffee and trading recipes, when my phone buzzed on the table. The name flashing across the screen made me pause. Vanessa. It wasn't a call, but a text. Curious, I slid my finger across the screen. The words lit up like a bomb. Can't wait to see you tonight. Daniel's working late again, and the old bat will be asleep by 9. We'll have the whole house to ourselves. Wear that cologne I like, Stephen. My breath caught. Clara leaned over, squinting at the message. Her eyes widened. Well, she said dryly, that's interesting. Interesting was one word for it. I had others, none polite enough to say out loud. I tapped out a quick reply before I could second-guess myself. I think you meant to send this to someone else, Vanessa. Might want to be more careful with your phone. 3 dots blinked on the screen, frantic. Then her answer came. Oh God, Eleanor. I can explain. Come home now. 20 minutes later, she burst through my front door without knocking, her face flushed, hair messy as though she'd run the whole way. She looked less like the polished yoga guru she pretended to be, and more like a guilty teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. Eleanor, please, she gasped. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, placing my phone on the coffee table, the screenshot still glowing. You're having an affair. Her mouth opened, but I held up a hand. The only question is, does Daniel know? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I snapped. For the first time in years, my anger rose unchecked, hot and sharp. You're cheating on my son in my house while he works himself ragged to keep you comfortable. How long, Vanessa? She looked down at her shoes, voice barely a whisper. 8 months. 8 months. My son had been sacrificing, tutoring after school, proctoring exams on weekends, stretching every dollar of his teacher's salary while his wife was sneaking around with another man. Who is he? I demanded. You don't know him. Try me. She hesitated, then whispered. His name is Stephen Carter. He owns a construction company. The name meant nothing to me, but I filed it away like evidence. Men who cheated with married women rarely came without baggage. Does his wife know? Her silence was answer enough. I see, I said coldly. So you're not just destroying my son's marriage, you're destroying someone else's too. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard. What's her name, Vanessa? Stephen's wife. She blanched. You can't. What's her name? Laura. she whispered finally. Laura Carter. I nodded once. Then you have a choice. You can tell Daniel about your affair tonight and end this charade of a marriage with at least a shred of dignity, or I can tell him myself along with your mother, your father, and Mrs. Carter. Her eyes widened, panic flooding her face. You're blackmailing me. No, I corrected, opening the front door and gesturing for her to leave. I'm giving you an opportunity to do the right thing for once in your miserable life. You have until tomorrow morning. Either you tell him, or I will. Oh. She stood frozen, clutching her phone like it might save her. I didn't flinch. Oh, and Vanessa? I added, my voice icy. Pack your bags tonight. Affair or no affair, you're still out in 20 days. This just makes it easier. She left without another word. I shut the door behind her, leaned against it, and finally let myself feel the weight of it all. My gentle, trusting son was married to a liar who cheated, who pocketed cash she never reported, who used my house as her personal stage. Some people don't deserve fresh starts. Some people deserve exactly what they get. That night, Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway earlier than usual. From my bedroom window, I watched him sit in the cab, shoulders slumped, head in his hands. After several long minutes, he finally walked to the door and knocked softly. Mom, are you awake? I opened the door. Daniel looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single day. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. She told me, he said flatly, about Stephen. I studied his face in the lamplight. And do you believe her excuses? He shook his head, jaw tight. 8 months, Mom. She's been lying to me for 8 months. About the money, about the studio, about everything. I nodded. I know. He rubbed his face with both hands, his voice breaking. What kind of husband am I that I didn't see it, that I didn't suspect a thing? I reached out and took his hand, the same way I had when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. You're not a bad husband, Daniel. You're trusting, and she took advantage of that. This isn't your fault. He stared at me, eyes hollow. She says she wants to work it out. Counseling. A fresh start. And what do you want? I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. I want the last 3 years of my life back. I want to stop feeling like the biggest fool in the world. I squeezed his hand gently. Then don't waste another minute on someone who never deserved you. For the first time, I saw anger flicker in his eyes, anger at her, not at himself. It was a start. 3 days after the affair came to light, I saw the black BMW long before it stopped in my driveway. Sleek, polished, arrogant, just like the woman who stepped out of the passenger seat. Vanessa emerged first, her chin tilted high as if she hadn't just been caught cheating. Beside her was her mother, Margaret Cole, perfectly coiffed in a tailored suit, heels clicking like gavel strikes on the pavement. From the driver's side came Richard Cole, her father, and, as I suspected, her legal weapon. The man carried a leather briefcase and the smug confidence of someone used to winning arguments by sheer intimidation. I wiped my hands on my gardening gloves, laid my shears carefully on the porch railing, and waited. Mrs. Hayes, Margaret said, her tone brisk and cool, we need to clear up this little misunderstanding. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. Which misunderstanding would that be? I asked, pulling off my gloves one finger at a time. The one where your daughter humiliated me at my own dinner table? Or the one where she's been living in my house while lying to my son and pocketing cash on the side? Richard stepped forward smoothly, like a man entering a courtroom. Let's keep this civil, Mrs. Hayes. I'm here as counsel for my daughter. Daniel and Vanessa have lived in this home for 3 years. They have legal standing, sweat equity, household contributions, improvements they've invested too much for you to simply throw them out on a whim. I almost laughed. Instead, I folded my arms and tilted my head. Sweat equity, you say? Improvements? With whose money, Mr. Cole? Mine. Every coat of paint, every piece of furniture, every repairman called it all, came out of my pocket. Vanessa hasn't contributed a single dime. Margaret bristled. She's been managing the household, coordinating maintenance, overseeing renovations. That counts for something. I let out a soft chuckle. Yes, it counts as what any responsible tenant might do, take care of the place they live in. It doesn't equal ownership. Richard opened his briefcase and produced a sheaf of papers. They've lived there continuously, contributed labor, invested time. The law recognizes implied partnership in property ownership. If this goes to court, you may not have the airtight case you think you do. Oh, I have something better than that, I said pleasantly. I turned, walked into the house, and returned with a thick folder. Setting it down on the porch table, I flipped it open to reveal 3 neat stacks of bank records. 36 checks, I said, tapping the top stack. One for every month since they moved in. All made out to me. All with one word written in the memo line: rent. Every single one deposited into my account. Would you like copies? The silence that followed was delicious. Margaret's lips parted, then snapped shut again. Richard cleared his throat, clearly recalibrating. You understand, he said carefully, that this arrangement could still be challenged. Family agreements often blur the lines. No, I interrupted, my voice hardening. This isn't blurred. This is black and white. Your daughter and my son have been my tenants, not co-owners, not partners, tenants, and tenants can be evicted. I pulled another document from the folder and slid it across the table toward him. Which brings me to this, a formal eviction notice, effective immediately. 30 days. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. You can't do this, she shrieked, her voice shrill in the quiet neighborhood. You can't just throw us out like dogs. I can, and I will, I replied calmly. Because you've mistaken kindness for weakness. You thought my silence was consent. It wasn't. It was patience, and my patience has run out. Richard's jaw tightened, but even he knew the battle was lost. The evidence was too clean, too thorough. His usual courtroom tactics, bluster, intimidation, had no purchase here. Margaret glared at me, her eyes cold. You'll regret this. Doubtful, I said. The only thing I regret is letting this charade go on for 3 years. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Richard gathered his papers back into his briefcase, snapping it shut with a finality that sounded almost like defeat. He placed a hand on Vanessa's arm. Let's go. Vanessa yanked her arm free, eyes blazing with fury. This isn't over, she spat. I leaned against the porch railing, utterly unruffled. Oh, Vanessa, it's more over than you realize. They stormed back to the BMW, Margaret muttering angrily under her breath, Richard silent, Vanessa vibrating with rage. The car pulled out of my driveway with a squeal of tires, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and desperation. I picked up my gardening shears again, clipping the last of the winter roses. My hands were steady, my breath was calm. I had faced far tougher opponents in my 32 years with the IRS men who thought they could hide fortunes in offshore accounts, CEOs who believed they were untouchable. Compared to them, the Coles were amateurs. But I knew something they didn't. I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Vanessa's lies were starting to unravel, and once a thread comes loose, the whole garment eventually falls apart. The eviction notice was only the beginning. The morning after the Coles stormed off my porch, I was trimming roses in the garden when I heard the crunch of hurried footsteps on the gravel path. It was Clara Simmons, my neighbor and oldest friend, her face pale and tight with urgency. She clutched a manila folder to her chest like it might burn a hole through her fingers. Eleanor, she said breathlessly, we need to talk. I wiped dirt from my hands onto my jeans and gestured toward the porch. Coffee's hot. You look like you've seen a ghost. She shook her head. Not a ghost, something worse. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table. Clara slid the folder across to me, her hands trembling. My cousin Rosa works at the county clerk's office. After what happened with Vanessa and those lawyers, I asked her to check some records. Eleanor, Vanessa isn't just cheating on Daniel. She's married to someone else. For a moment, I couldn't process the words. Married. To someone else. I flipped open the folder. There it was, in black and white, a marriage certificate from Las Vegas. 3 months ago, Vanessa Cole had wed Stephen Carter. The same Stephen she'd been sneaking into my house when Daniel was working late. I felt the air leave my lungs. But she's still married to Daniel. Clara nodded grimly. Exactly. It's bigamy, Eleanor. A felony. I sat back, staring at the papers. My son's wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was a criminal. There's more, Clara said softly. Rosa dug deeper. Stephen Carter's been transferring assets to Vanessa, money, investments, even partial ownership in his construction company. All within the last few months. Looks like she's been building herself a nest egg. I scanned the documents, property transfers, business filings, bank account changes. One by one, the puzzle pieces fell into place, and the picture they formed was uglier than anything I'd imagined. She played both sides, I whispered, living off Daniel's paycheck while siphoning off Stephen's wealth, all under my roof. Clara nodded. She's done this before, Eleanor. Rosa says there are whispers at the courthouse, other families, other schemes. Vanessa might be a professional at this. The room felt colder. I closed the folder and pressed my palms against the wood grain of the table, grounding myself. My son had been targeted. My family had been nothing more than a mark on a con woman's list. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar but local. I answered. Mrs. Hayes, this is Detective Rachel Morrison with the County Sheriff's Office. Do you have a moment? My spine straightened instantly. I do. We're currently investigating financial fraud and bigamy charges connected to a woman named Vanessa Cole. I understand she's your daughter-in-law. I glanced at Clara. Yes, she is. Mrs. Hayes, we've been tracking her for 2 weeks, building a case from complaints filed by a woman named Laura Carter, Stephen Carter's ex-wife. When Stephen abruptly divorced her and shifted assets, she hired a private investigator. That's how the bigamy surfaced. Your family wasn't the only target. Vanessa has been on our radar for months. I gripped the phone tighter. She's been married to my son since 2021. She married Carter without divorcing Daniel. That's ironclad bigamy. That's exactly what we're documenting, Morrison said. But it's bigger than that. We're looking at tax evasion, wire fraud, mail fraud, possibly identity theft. Do you have documentation of payments from your son to Vanessa or to you? I opened the folder I'd already prepared. 3 years of rent checks, neatly organized, everyone with Daniel's signature and rent in the memo line. Yes, Detective. 36 checks, plus screenshots of clients' social posts tagging Vanessa for private sessions. Morrison's voice brightened. That will help immensely. Could we meet tomorrow? I'd like to collect your evidence formally. Of course, I said. But Detective, there's one thing you should know. Vanessa believes she's untouchable. If she senses an investigation, she'll try to run. Morrison didn't hesitate. Don't worry, Mrs. Hayes. We already have eyes on her. When I hung up, Clara let out a slow breath. So it's real. They're really going after her. I poured us both coffee, though my hands trembled slightly as I set the cups down. Clara, my son married a woman who wasn't just cruel. She was calculating. She had this planned all along. Clara touched my hand. You did everything you could to protect him. Now it's time to let the law take over. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the eviction notice still on the mantel, the folder of evidence on the table, and my heart heavier than it had been in years. The truth was out, and it was worse than I'd feared. But for the first time, I felt something else beneath the grief resolve. Vanessa Cole thought she could humiliate me, bleed Daniel dry, siphon off another man's fortune, and walk away untouched. She thought no one would notice. She thought no one would fight back. She was wrong. And when the day came, because I knew it was coming, I'd be standing at the window, coffee in hand, watching the flashing red and blue lights take her away. The flashing red and blue lights finally came 9 days before the eviction deadline. From my living room window, coffee in hand, I watched 2 sheriff's cruisers glide silently into the Maple Street driveway. The knock on the door was firm, practiced, final. Within minutes, Vanessa was in handcuffs, her designer tracksuit replaced by shock. Her voice carried through the night. This is a mistake. My father's a lawyer. You can't do this to me. But they could, and they did. Daniel stood frozen in the yard, his face pale in the glow of the patrol car headlights. I could see the storm of emotions inside him, grief, betrayal, humiliation, but also something harder, cleaner. The recognition that the woman he thought he knew had never existed at all. Take all the time you need, son. I said softly when he came into my house later that night. "The house will still be here when you're ready. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me." 3 months later, I sat in the back of a federal courtroom, the air heavy with murmurs and the scent of old wood. The defendant's table looked nothing like Vanessa's Instagram feed. She sat slumped in an orange jumpsuit, hair pulled back, stripped of every ounce of glamour. Beside her, Stephen Carter looked equally hollow, his expensive suits traded for county-issue beige. At the front, Assistant U.S. Attorney Amanda Reyes stood tall, her voice crisp as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the defendant operated a sophisticated marriage fraud scheme for over 2 years. She targeted widowed women and their adult children across 3 states. The Hayes family was victim number 7. 7. The number echoed in my chest. My family wasn't her first. We had simply been the latest." Reyes continued, laying out the charges one by one. Bigamy, tax evasion, wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft. The list stretched on for nearly 20 minutes. Charts appeared on the projector: bank transfers, marriage certificates, social media posts. Every detail of Vanessa's lies was dragged into the light. "The pattern is clear," Reyes said. The defendant would infiltrate families under the guise of marriage, gain access to finances and assets, then secretly marry wealthier targets while maintaining her first marriages for continued support. In total, she stole or attempted to steal over $2.3 million. The courtroom was silent. Even the air felt stunned. At the mention of our name, Daniel straightened in his seat beside me. He looked older, wearier, but steadier, too. For months he had carried the shame of being fooled, but now he knew the truth. He wasn't the fool. He was the mark of a professional predator. When it came time for sentencing, the judge didn't hesitate. "For your crimes," he said sternly, "this court sentences you, Vanessa Cole, to 8 years in federal prison." Vanessa didn't cry. She didn't plead. She sat stone-faced, jaw tight, as if still refusing to believe the world had finally caught up to her. Stephen Carter received 4 years for his role in transferring assets. In the gallery, I spotted Laura Carter, Stephen's ex-wife. She looked composed, even dignified, as she listened to the judgment. Later, in the hallway, she approached Daniel and me. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "Your evidence made the difference. But more than that, it reminded me this wasn't personal. Vanessa didn't ruin our families because of who we were. She did it because of what she wanted." Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "I'm sorry you went through it too." She smiled sadly. "We'll rebuild. Both of us." Weeks later, when the dust finally settled, Daniel moved into a modest apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was his name on the lease, his furniture, his bills. For the first time, he was building something real, something his own. As for me, I returned to the quiet of my sunroom. The roses bloomed again, and with them, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. And I had a secret of my own, one Vanessa had never even glimpsed. For all her digging, all her posturing, she'd assumed I was a lonely widow scraping by on her late husband's pension. She never suspected that behind the walls of my modest ranch home lay the carefully managed results of decades of discipline, investment, and foresight. $42 million. That was the true size of the estate my husband and I had built. Life insurance, compounded investments, real estate trusts, quiet, steady growth, tucked away behind the kind of paperwork only an IRS investigator would know how to guard. I never flaunted it. I never waved it like a flag. Because money wasn't protection if you advertised it, it was protection if you managed it. Vanessa mocked me for being unemployed. She thought she was gaming an old woman, but she never realized the real game was one she'd already lost before it began. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most teach us the hardest lessons. Vanessa taught me that kindness without boundaries is just weakness, that love without limits becomes fuel for abusers. She reminded me that protecting your family sometimes means being ruthless with those who would harm them. To anyone listening, I hope you remember this. Your worth is not measured by who mocks you, but by who you refuse to let walk over you. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't shouting or even punishing, It's reclaiming your peace, your home, and your life on your own terms. I raised my coffee cup toward the window, where the morning light spilled across the lawn. Here's to boundaries, I whispered, and here's to freedom.